It's the last day of the dead period, which means the recruiting world is about to come alive. We have an update on the #1 player in the 2024 class. That's Dylan Raiola. Plus, it's never too early to talk about the #1 player in 2025, David Sanders. He was at the Under Armour camp this weekend, and so are we. We'll show you what we saw and tell you about a big weekend coming up for Brian Kelly and LSU. All that and more as the college football recruiting show starts right now. Alongside Blair Angulo, I'm Emily Proud. Please submit some questions in the chat. We will answer them at the end of the show, but the only way you can do that is if you are subscribed to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, so go ahead and do that. Also, like this video. If you hit that like button, we're going to hit the headlines. Let's do it, Blair. The #1 player in the 2025 class, David Sanders, was named our alpha dog of the Under Armour All-America camp in Atlanta this past weekend. The 6'7" offensive tackle, who's still a ways away from signing, wants to visit Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, among others in the months to come. So, Blair, why do we need to learn the name David Sanders?
Well, for one, we're probably going to be talking about David Sanders quite consistently for the next year and a half, and for good reason. He's a long, athletic offensive tackle. When you think about what an NFL franchise offensive lineman looks like as a sophomore, David Sanders is the prototype.
We will dig into the All-America camp in just a bit, but first, the top running back in 2024, Jarek Gibson, has received a crystal ball from our own Steve Wiltfong to Texas. He was once committed to Florida, and there are plenty more schools in the mix. Blair, why is he such a coveted prospect?
It's the burst and the explosiveness for me, Emily. Jarek Gibson does a tremendous job of finding gaps and getting small when he has to, making cuts and then running past defenders. It's hard to find those true running backs at the high school level, and that undoubtedly increases the demand for a player like Jarek Gibson, who has incredible tools.
Ooh, you can see it on the tape. Steve will join us in just minutes with more intel. Meanwhile, the Vols landed a commitment yesterday from 4-star wideout J.J. Harrell. He is the #6 player in the state of Mississippi, and Tennessee now has the 9th ranked class in 2024 with 5 commitments. How big a get is this?
It's significant in a number of ways, obviously to beat out some of the SEC schools that Tennessee beat out, but also to add another offensive weapon for Nico Iamaleava down the road. Nathan Leacock and Ethan Davis were 2 notable 4-star wins for the Vols on offense in the previous cycle, and J.J. Harrell is a nice start for 2024.
All right, added to the list, another crystal ball to Nebraska for the top player in 2024. That's Dylan Raiola. Matt Rule hasn't even coached a game for the Cornhuskers yet, but this, Blair, would be a massive win. Why?
Well, it would obviously give them a huge boost, not only to land a legacy recruit, but to land a quarterback, to land a cornerstone, to land the face of what could be the program for the years to come. So I've said it time and time again, Emily, this is probably the most important recruit for any school, for any program in the country. Dylan Raiola to Nebraska, he's that big for the Cornhuskers.
That's why we have him #1. And for more on the top prospect, let's welcome in our friend Steve Wiltfong, Director of Recruiting. Steve, Raiola was in Lincoln on Saturday. That's why we're talking about him. He was taken in a hoops game. Of course, the current dead period meant no meeting with Rule. But what did Dylan say about his visit and his upcoming plans?
Yeah, and the reason why he was able to go, just for people that don't know, is his uncle's the offensive line coach at Nebraska. And it was a boys' trip to go see family. His little brother, Dayton Raiola, was there. His dad, and they had a trip to the basketball game where he said, I've never experienced anything close to that. Those fans are the best. They've always showed my family love. It means a lot. It's a blessing to be able to experience these fans at these games. They always show out for their Husker sports, and it's a great sight to see. And we know Nebraska, they travel for away games as well as any program in the country. They are starved to win. And I think that Matt Rule is going to win regardless, but to get to land a player of the caliber of Dylan Raiola, that's a national championship caliber signal caller right there under center. Those guys are rare. And he's told me that Matt Rule wants to win right now, and he wants to do it the right way. He's not going to cut corners. He's going to build it from the ground up. And you saw a really terrific 2023 class for Nebraska, and they put a lot into this Dylan Raiola recruitment. Matt Rule went by the school. Then the next week, 9 assistant coaches went by the school in January. There's no question the Huskers have a lot of momentum in this recruitment. I think that Dylan Raiola is taking a heat check on other blue chippers and their interest in Nebraska. And his dad was blown away this weekend. Obviously, he's in Nebraska, one of the greatest players to ever suit up at Nebraska. His numbers retired, and he was just blown away at the moment that his son had there on campus. He was so proud. But they're gonna be back in Nebraska on the 25th. Georgia's going to get the next visit. He talks to Mike Bobo every day. Lincoln Riley, they visited at the end of January. He talks to Lincoln Riley every day. So even though Nebraska definitely has a lot of momentum, they still have some challengers on the trail.
Yeah, Nebraska, Georgia, formerly committed to Ohio State, and we mentioned USC being 3 of the schools that are named and mentioned the most for Dylan Raiola, and he would bring a lot on the field, Steve. But when you think about the recruiting impact on and off the field that a Dylan Raiola could have for Nebraska, why is he so important?
Well, Nebraska, under Matt Rule, they're never going to be a program that's enamored by stars. They're going to be one of the first programs to offer guys. That's going to be their trait. They have a very thorough evaluation process led by Omar Hales off the field, but the coaches are very involved in that, and they find guys with traits and upside, and they love to develop those guys. Now, they're certainly going to be in the mix for several blue chippers, but I still think the recipe is going to overall be the same. I think that we'll see Nebraska, if they were to land Dylan Raiola, maybe land a few other top 247 prospects, but I think once we see their class in December and February, we look up and down it. We're like, well, maybe we should have that guy ranked higher. Maybe we should have that guy ranked higher. Maybe we should have that guy ranked higher, because they just do a fantastic job of finding great high school football players that other programs just aren't on.
All right, the dead period does not mean that the crystal ball stopped for you. You just put one in for Texas to land the aforementioned Jarrett Gibson out of IMG Academy. And for those keeping track at home, this would be the second straight year the Longhorns have gone into Florida and landed the top back. They just did it last year with Cedric Baxter. Steve, what has you favoring Sark and company in this recruitment?
Yeah, talking to Jarek and talking to his dad this week, and talking to his dad a little bit last week as well. We're going to have a feature on the 24/7 Sports Network later on this week on Jarek, which lets people know what kind of young man and player he is. But Texas is no question blown him away to date in this process. Tashard Choice, Texas's running backs coach, was one of the first coaches to offer Gibson a scholarship. They have a fantastic relationship, and Choice House has a fantastic relationship with Jarek's family. Steve Sarkisian is recruiting this young man as hard as anybody he recruited on the board last cycle too. So, and you guys know they landed number 1, Arch Manning. So Texas is not being out recruited for Jarrett Gibson. He's enjoyed his time in Austin. He's going to go back for the spring game on an unofficial, and then he's going to take his official in June. There's some other contenders. Tennessee is a program that I'm certainly not taking lightly in this one as well. They really like Coach Mack and Coach Heupel and the straightforward approach. They love the offense. They love the trajectory of the program. And then Georgia's going to get an official the first week of June, and they can't be slept on. Jarek really likes Georgia. Their program is probably sitting in the 3 position, but we've seen Del McGee and the Bulldogs rally for blue chippers before. Alabama's getting official the second weekend. Obviously, he loves the accolades and tradition of Alabama under Nick Saban, and he's going to go to Miami in June as well. So Mario Cristobal and the Hurricanes still swinging.
We mentioned that the recruiting dead period is winding down, and one of those prospects that is now shifting his focus to recruiting is 5-star athlete Mike Matthews. Steve, who are some of the schools that are on the radar, and our understanding is he still has not scheduled any official visits yet?
Yeah, I talked to his mom last week. They weren't scheduling any visits until he was done with the basketball season. I know that he loved his visit to USC a couple months ago and is excited to get back out there and spend more time with Dante Williams, Lincoln Riley and company. He had a fantastic visit to Tennessee in January, also attended their win over Alabama. The Tennessee program and the culture really stands out to Matthews and his mom. And they're recruiting him as a wideout as well. He can play whatever he wants for them, but they just landed J.J. Harrell. They'd like to get Ryan Wingo in their position well for Mike Matthews. So that could be a heck of a receiver haul for Tennessee. But Clemson, Georgia, some of the other schools swinging. Alabama, he's been there a couple times. Those are the other schools that he's high on.
All right, we have 125 people watching. First off, during the dead period, this is awesome. You guys clearly love the recruiting content, but we only have 35 likes. So please hit that like button if you are watching the video. Steve's given the 2 thumbs up. That's what the like button looks like. So he gave you a nice little key for what to smash. All right, 2024 4-star running back Kevin Riley has some top programs chasing him down. You see him chasing down with the football, but he is the number 7 back in the class. He's got a few visits lined up. What's the latest with his recruitment, Steve?
Yeah, there's a school, he's looking at several big-time programs right now. He's one of the most coveted running backs in the SEC. He's going to take a visit to Auburn. He's going to return to Auburn in June, and that's a program that I kind of have a really close eye on for him right now. And Auburn, we have not seen them land touted players in years. And I talked to a source in the state that said, Hugh Freeze is killing it in state. He's going to be a problem for Alabama in state due to their going to be so aggressive about things, and they got kids loving it. And all the kids that visit like Auburn and Freeze, coupled with the person before, they said a different word. He was so bad that Freeze coming in, whatever he's doing is magnified. He's doing a wonderful job, but it's magnified. He's so much better than the other guy and so much more welcoming. And so he's built a good relationship with Cadillac Williams and the Auburn staff. And there's a lot of in-state guys looking at Auburn, but he's going to be making the rounds and is one of the most coveted players in the SEC. So they'll have a lot of competition. But it's an exciting time to be an Auburn fan.
And staying in the SEC, Steve, Bryce Underwood is one of the better quarterbacks in the 2025 class. Supposed to head down to LSU this weekend. It's early in his recruitment. He's got a long way to go before pen meets paper. But what can you tell us about the recruitment of Bryce Underwood at this stage?
Yeah, he's going to visit LSU this week. He's going to get down there on Thursday and spend all day on campus on Friday. And this is a visit that he's been looking forward to since the process began. When you talk to his old high school coach and you talk to his parents, they've been talking up LSU for a long time. And Joe Sloan, LSU's quarterbacks coach, is already building a great relationship with Bryce. And he's going to be attached to his hip all week this week when he gets down to Baton Rouge. He'll get some time with Brian Kelly, Mike Denbrock, and the staff. But he just loves the tradition of LSU, Death Valley, the excitement around that program, the night games, the tradition, guys like Joe Burrow coming out of there. And he thinks the program's on the rise with guys like Brian Kelly leading that program, who he's familiar with, obviously, from his time at Notre Dame. I think that LSU, he is not named favorites. Bryce Underwood is not named any favorites, but there's no doubt in my mind that if he did, LSU would be near the top of his list. Ohio State's another program that he visited back in December, I believe, and he really enjoyed that visit. He sees himself in C.J. Stroud, loves Ryan Day's offense and him and Coach Dennis and Coach Hartline and the offense that they produce year in and year out. So Ohio State has definitely moved the needle. And he had a great visit to Penn State in January. He wants to get back to Ohio State and Michigan for spring practices, his dad told me, but this is an exciting visit to LSU. They can't wait to get down there and spend a lot of time with the Bayou Bengals.
No, Tigers fans love to hear that, and stick around. We actually have more LSU talk on the way, but as we've said, today is the final day of the dead period, which means college campuses are coming alive this weekend, hosting lots of prospects. Norman, I hear, will be hopping. So who are some big names to look out for visiting Oklahoma this weekend?
Well, Oklahoma doesn't have a commit yet, but the class that Brent Venables and company had last year, we know that when all said and done, they're going to boast one of the best classes in the cycle. And one of their most coveted players, regardless of position, is our top-ranked defensive lineman, Williams Nwaneri, who was offered last January, has already built a great relationship with Coach Chavis and Coach Bates, and of course Brent Venables. And look, we've said this many times, Oklahoma's defense ranked 129th nationally this year. They recruited amazing on that side of the ball in 2023, and Brent Venables and company is all in trying to add more difference makers here in 2024 because we know he is not accustomed to running out one of the worst defenses in college football. There's no question Williams Nwaneri has Oklahoma near the top of his list. I think Oregon, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Missouri, are some of the other schools that are in there. It's early for him. He's going to visit Colorado for the spring game, but Oklahoma, I imagine they're going to make a big move with him this weekend. Kobe Black's a 5-star cornerback from Connolly, Texas. I'm told earlier in the week by a source that he could be in Norman this weekend. He's one of the most coveted corners in the country. He's been in Texas a couple times. The Longhorns and Steve Sarkisian have been able to make an impression, but Oklahoma was one of his first offers as well. Brent Venables personally gave it to him, and he's leading the charge on that one as well.
Awesome, Steve. Appreciate it. I hear you're sticking around in the chat, so if you have any questions for him, please submit them. And the only way that you can do that is if you are subscribed to the YouTube page. And starting next week, new episodes of the Wiltfong Whip Around dropping every Monday and Friday on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel.
Oh, hello. I'm Josh Pate. I want to thank you guys for watching the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, but I also want to let you know 85% of you still aren't subscribed to the channel, and it's free. So like the video you're watching, subscribe to the channel, and keep all of this free of charge.
Carrollton, Georgia was the place to be this past weekend for future stars to show their stuff. The Under Armour Camp Next series featured over 150 players from the 2024 class and beyond. We were there and caught up with 2 top quarterback prospects. The first, a name I know you won't forget, Air Noland. The 4-star quarterback spoke about the heavy interest he's received from Arkansas.
Coach Pittman, Coach Ennis, Coach Jimmy Smith, man, they recruit the heck out of me. Man, they love the person I am off the field. They visited my school twice. You know, it's about me getting my butt up there, showing my face. And I think Coach Ennis, he's coached a ton of lefties and had success with it. Of course, he had success with 2 at Alabama. So, that definitely plays a factor. And I think Coach Ennis, man, he loves who I am. And I think, Arkansas is worth a try.
Noland recently picked up an offer from Alabama and detailed how emotional his visit to Tuscaloosa was.
It was very honoring. My mom almost cried in that office, but Coach Saban, it was very honoring to get off from him. Very, very blessed. Not many kids can say they got off from Alabama, but it speaks tone about the hard work I put in, this past season, and not only me but the other 10 guys. We were very, very, passionate about the game of football, and it showed by going 15-0. And I think Coach Saban, seen it on film.
As for when he plans to make his commitment, the clock is ticking and he won't be waiting long.
I plan on committing April, around sometime there. I don't want to wait too long, but I know the portal will open back up soon, so I want to go ahead and make my decision very, very soon. So very soon.
Auburn currently leads in the crystal ball. And speaking of quarterbacks, fellow 4-star Jake Merklinger told us about his upcoming visit to Rocky Top.
Tennessee, I've got a great relationship with those guys. Coach Ivins, Coach Halsey, we communicate on a really consistent basis. And just to be able to get back there, there's not really, someone asked me if there's something particular you want to see. I was just kind of I just want to go hang out and be around the guys, be around the coaches. I think I'm going to go to a baseball game the night before, so I'm really looking forward to that.
The Savannah, Georgia native also has an offer from the hometown school and back-to-back champs.
GCA speaks for itself, but the other hometown state, they offered me recently, so I'm excited to get there on that 19th and 20th. I've got a really great relationship with Coach Bobo so far. I can't wait to connect with him in person and see what he's going to do there.
Merklinger details what will go into his college decision and when he expects to commit.
Right now, I just kind of finding the best spot for me as far as the home away from home, the family relationship, just not worrying too much about depth charts and things of that nature.
All right, we have 130 people watching, so here's my plea again. We have over 50 likes. I'd love to get to 100 likes, so smash that like button. All right, so now that you've heard from 2 top prospects, let's talk about a few more with our Director of Scouting, Andrew Ivins. And before we name names, Andrew, first, I got to know, what was your biggest takeaway from this event?
Air Noland, we just heard from him. We came into the event. We've talked about him on this show. We've talked about him on the podcast. He's a stock up guy for us. And, he checked off all the boxes. It's kind of hard for quarterbacks in these type of camps to shine and put on a show with just the one-on-ones and how they're set up. Normally at the Elite 11 regionals, it's all quarterbacks. This is more skilled players, offensive linemen. But, he threw some dimes over the middle, so we were impressed with that. And then another takeaway, I know you guys are going to talk about LSU in a few minutes. I was really impressed with the two Tiger pledges that were there. Joseph Stone, wide receiver. I thought he was one of the more explosive route runners. And then Zion Ferguson, defensive back. He's put on some good weight. LSU sitting number 3 in the rankings right now. We know Brian Kelly's going to go big game hunting, but if those are kind of the base or the floor of this recruiting class, then LSU is going to load up and they're going to sign another really, really talented group of prospects under Brian Kelly.
Andrew, let's start with the alpha dog from the event, the number 1 player in the 2025 class, offensive tackle David Sanders. You got to see him live, you got to see him up close and personal, and at these camp settings, it's alpha on alpha. What made him the alpha dog among the alphas?
Well, he won the measurements, the eye test. I mean, this is our number 1 player in the class of 2025. He showed up, was over 6'6". He's got a 7-foot wingspan, 36-inch arms. You see him on video right here. You know, he's kind of narrow. A lot of people question the weight, but he's got 2 years before he gets to college, and then he's probably going to redshirt. So we're not worried about his size right now. I think the most impressive thing for him, aside from that length, is just how quick and how explosive he is. He's a state champion in the shot put. He only took 2 one-on-one reps, but they came against a rising senior in Sterling Dixon, and we were really impressed just with his ability and his feet, how he recovered, refortified, and ended up winning the reps. You know, that's the most impressive thing about David Sanders. You know, it's traits with him. Stock up, and by the way, his dad was also hanging out. We talked with him a little bit on the sidelines. Dad's a big dude. He was wearing an Alabama hat, so we're not worried about David Sanders, you know, being a little bit lean now. He's going to fill out eventually. So we liked what we saw, feel really good about that number 1 ranking for him.
Man, that video is insane. Seeing him on an all-out sprint at that height and weight, whew, is impressive. Sticking with 2025 Alabama wide receiver commit Ryan Williams shined. The 6-foot receiver has been committed to the Crimson Tide since October of 2022. What did he look like this past weekend?
He was a guy that his number 41 came up in my notes time and time again. I think he probably scored a dozen touchdowns during that 20-minute session where he was going up against defensive backs. And really the only defender that gave him issues was his cleats. They kept coming off when he was running routes. Ryan Williams, silky smooth. He's explosive, and he can go get the football. He's not the biggest individual. If you're kind of, you know, trying to figure out a comparison in terms of his frame, maybe Devontae Smith, the former Alabama wide receiver. You know, he's thin, he's wiry, but again, he can produce big plays. And Ryan Williams, this past fall, was named Mr. Football in Alabama, first ever sophomore to win that award. So we really like Ryan Williams. You know, just like with David Sanders, you know, you come into the camp hoping that a guy you have ranked high performs well, and he checked off every box. He's going to be a difference maker on Saturdays, inside, outside, whatever you need. Excited to track him over the next 2 years before he heads off to the SEC.
South Carolina commit Michael Smith was among the really good tight end group in Atlanta, and obviously he was one of the standouts on the top performer list. Andrew, what stood out to you about Michael Smith?
Well, Blair, you've been on these recruiting calls, right? As we've dug more into this 2024 class, I keep saying it, this thing is loaded with tight ends. I mean, we might have 18 of them or 20 of them in the top 247. And for me, Michael Smith is one of my favorites. You know, he's not the biggest guy in terms of how tall he is, probably closer to 6'2" than he is 6'4". But once one-on-ones got underway, his ability to create separation at the top of his routes and then just box out defenders and make catches was super impressive. You know, when you look towards the NFL draft, and you're going to hear it all with the NFL Combine coming up, the most important thing for tight ends is that short area quickness, the ability to shake defenders. And I think Michael Smith does that really well. Had a really productive junior season there down at Calvary Day in Savannah, catching passes from Jake Merklinger. Headed to South Carolina. In the Gamecocks, they just signed Nicholas Harbor. Now they got Michael Smith, Shane Beamer. He's got a background and a history with tight ends. The future of that room is looking pretty bright for the Gamecocks.
Not too shabby. Finally, 2 edge players from 2024. First, you got Jamonta Walker out of Mississippi. He has risen up the rankings as of late. Now that you saw him in person, how did he verify your evaluation of him as a top 247 prospect?
He's exactly what we thought he would be. And when Austin Mack, the Washington quarterback commit, reclassified from 2024 to 2023, Cooper Patagna, my guy, the first name he brought up as someone who rise into the top 247 was Jamonte Waller. Now he's a bit of a tweener, right? Is he a linebacker? Is he an edge player? I'm not really sure. We still got to kind of figure out how he's going to fill out over the next few years. But I do know this, right? He can change directions. He's got some burst. He brings the juice off the edge. We thought it was a really solid overall day for him. Would have been nice to maybe see him work as an off-ball linebacker in coverage, but he's got the goods, feeling really, really good about what he brings to the table. And, I anticipate his stock is only going to rise. I think more and more schools are going to get involved. He's there in Mississippi. Ole Miss, Mississippi State are going to be battling it out, but I think the big boys in the SEC as well are going to be coming for Jamonte Waller.
The one-on-one battles are usually the highlight of an event like this, of a showcase where you get to see good versus good. Andrew and Jordan Ross was really good. What made him special? What stood out to you about Jordan Ross in Atlanta?
He's a little bit different than Jamonte Waller, right? Jamonte Waller, kind of a tweener. Jordan Ross, he's long. He's got the length. He's a bit skinny right now, but this is a kid that is also a prolific basketball player. Spent this past winter, running up and down the court. So you would think once he's done with hoops, he's going to fill out nicely. It's just how he kind of rounds the corner in his ankle flexion, that flexibility, and then he's aggressive with his hands. He had his way with a few different offensive linemen. It was a really talented offensive line group, and just like with Jamonte Waller, Jordan Ross, how he changes direction. It was impressive, and the staff working the camp said that he tested off the charts. We still haven't got those official numbers, but I think we're going to like what we see from him. And just like with most of these guys, the SEC, Big Ten, Pac-12, I think they're all going to come calling for Jordan Ross. And we heard Steve mentioning Auburn and Hugh Freeze and what they're doing. I think Jordan is a massive priority for the Tigers, and it's going to be interesting to see if they're getting fend off some of these other schools, because he has a chance to make a huge impact out on the edge for the Tigers as they look to rebuild that defensive line room.
Andrew, appreciate it. Be sure to check out this podcast, the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast with Andrew and Cooper Patagna. New episodes drop every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. You can find them wherever you get your podcast. To make Andrew feel special, as a reminder, hit that like button. Now that he's on his way out, we are 132 people watching and just 70 likes. We can do better than that. Let's hit that like button. And now let's head down to Baton Rouge, where Brian Kelly and LSU are getting ready to host a junior day this weekend. And when it's time to talk Tigers, there's only one place we call, and that is Go 247. Senior writer Sonny Shipp joining the program now. Sonny, about 25 to 35 prospects are set to attend, but in the past, we've actually seen a much larger attendance number for some of these junior days. So why do you think the staff chose to keep those numbers so small this weekend?
Yeah, and I think Blair and Andrew and Steve and all those other guys can attest to this, that I think it's part of what we've seen, how the dynamic has changed in recruiting. You've got kids taking so many more unofficial visits in the spring now. And, I can remember back, 5, 6, even 7 years ago, right before COVID, that LSU would have a junior day, would have 150, 200 kids on campus. And you can barely remember the names of the people that you meet and stuff. And so I think having a more personalized approach like Brian Kelly has done since he got here last year, I think that it's really that it's something that's going to pay the type of dividends that they saw last year, and that kind of parlayed them into that big June and July that they saw with picking up so many commitments from all of those spring visits that they had for those junior days.
Really important to build momentum early on in the recruiting cycle, and obviously it's the first weekend after the dead period. Bryce Underwood is set to attend. We spoke to Steve earlier, Sonny, about him being a headliner in the group. Who else will you be having your eyes on about the prospects that will be making it down to Baton Rouge?
Yeah, with LSU already having 2024 four-star quarterback Colin Hurley on board for that class, they can really kind of focus their attention and shift their attention to 2025 2026, and Bryce Underwood's certainly he's a huge target there. But they're going to have some other big name targets on campus as well. You look at 2025 inside the state of Louisiana, you have Keelan Moses, the younger brother of Dylan Moses, who is committed to LSU. It seemed like when he was in the 5th grade. I think it was junior high or something like that, but ended up spurning the Tigers and signing with Alabama. He's a guy who will be on campus. Really like the offensive linemen that they're going to get on campus. 2 guys out of Texas, Blake Frazier and Casey Poe. And with Louisiana being real light along the offensive line in this class, LSU needs to kind of shore up that interior. They'll really need to hit some of those guys outside the state. Then you look at Noriel White. He's a playmaker out of Mississippi. He's a guy who spent some time playing with Hurley on the 7-on-7 circuit. So they've kind of established a relationship. And I think he's a guy that when you start looking at the out-of-state targets who LSU has a real good shot at landing, that White is certainly one of those guys you would put at the top of the list.
Sonny, some people laughed, but the dancing clearly worked for Brian Kelly on the recruiting trail early on. LSU landing 5 of the top 9 players in Louisiana in that last cycle, but they also recruited really well across the country. So how much do you anticipate LSU supplementing with talent outside their region going forward?
Yeah, I think you're going to see them kind of compartmentalize that region a little bit more this year. Coming in last year, coaches had relationships from, you take Jamar Cain, for instance, a guy who had his relationships that he established while at Oklahoma, Brian Polian, even Brian Kelly. I think you start to see them kind of tighten in just a little bit more, because when you look at Texas, you look at Alabama, you look at Mississippi, look at Florida, those states that are really closer into that, I guess into that proximity, I think you're going to start to see them focus on that a little bit more. Maybe not as much of hitting out on Minnesota and Maryland and places like that. They're still going to recruit those areas, but I just think that you're going to start to see them kind of focus in and kind of starting to tighten that little belt a little bit more on this true Southeast region.
Yeah, LSU right now sits at number 3 among the national programs in the 2024 class rankings. Colin Hurley announced his commitment earlier in this cycle, and Sonny, I caught up with him in Las Vegas recently. He told me it was really important for him to hop on board early on so he could start pitching his own, I guess, selling point, right? His vision for the program. Why was this significant for Brian Kelly to go in and get a quarterback like Colin Hurley early on?
Yeah, and the dynamic with Hurley is kind of unique in itself, because he was a guy who committed the Friday before LSU and Alabama played, and we all know about the hoopla surrounding that huge game in Baton Rouge. But not only did he commit, but he also reclassified from the 2025 class to 2024. And so by him reclassifying like that, that really kind of I think it really gives you a chance to focus on those guys like a Bryce Underwood to really, kick up those notches, because when it comes to recruiting, quarterback recruiting is that one that's on a whole nother spectrum. It seems like it's just on a different time frame than other positions. And so to be able to focus on those areas, that you need to shore up and that you have to shore up in each class, and anytime you can get ahead in the game, I think is big. And to have a guy like Hurley, who is just, Tavion Galloway is another guy, Maurice Williams is another one, that those guys are just always repping LSU. Really, you see them active on Twitter and social media. And when you can have that, when the coaches are not the only ones promoting your brand, I think it's really a big for recruiting purposes.
You talk about getting early on a quarterback. 2025, and Bryce Underwood, of course, is somebody that they're paying attention to as well. So to recap, top 6 class for Brian Kelly in his first full recruiting cycle. And then he already has the 3rd best recruiting class in 2024 early on. So Sonny, as you try to project the rest of this class, what's the ceiling in your eyes?
I think that and it's kind of hard when you look at the class, because when you toss in the transfer ratings and things like that. But I think, anytime you start off when you're as high as they are right now, and when you look at their class, they have a bunch of good players, but you don't really have those guys who just give it that star power, so to say. You don't have the 5-star, you don't have the really high 4-star on there yet. And so once you start getting some of those guys in, then I think you'll start to kind of get a better sense of, okay, is this a top 3 class? Is this a top 5, top 7 class? But I think the one thing that Brian Kelly and this recruiting staff that is just relentless, the assistants get a lot of pub for the work that they do, but you look at their recruiting specialists, Sherman Wilson, Jordan Arsenal, Bobby Barham, all of those guys are personnel guys, John Randall Belt, and Corey Phillips. Those guys just really do a great job of not only identifying the talent, but establishing those relationships and the rapport that you have to be effective in recruiting. And so, I think at the end of the day that barring some type of collapse on the field, you're looking at another class that should be, in that top 3, top 5, top 6, top 7 realm, which I think is, top 5, top 6 is really not much of a difference from top 3, in my opinion.
It's all top, and it's all pretty good. Thank you, Sonny. Appreciate you joining the show. Well, as we look ahead to the upcoming cycle, and of course with spring ball underway, you need to check out Sonny's work at Go 24/7. It is time. It's our favorite part of the show, Blair. We're going to answer some questions. You ready?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yes, the chat has been absolutely wild today. We have over 120 people watching and still just 80 likes. I'm trying to get to 100. That would be awesome if we could do that by the end of the show. We would all be very happy here. So please hit that like button, and we're going to hit some of these questions. This first one from Jay Swear. How important is it for Nebraska to land other blue chip pieces in order to land Dylan Raiola?
This seems like a chicken or the egg, like which came first type of question. And I would think that you need Dylan Raiola to attract the other players to Nebraska. I don't think it would happen the other way around. It'd be difficult for Nebraska to entice those high caliber players, right? Those elite playmakers, the 5-star receivers, without knowing that Dylan Raiola will be in Lincoln alongside them. So I think they have to put all their eggs in one basket, and that's the Dylan Raiola basket. We mentioned a few weeks ago how 9 assistants went into the Phoenix area to meet up with Dylan Raiola during the contact period, and that was their clear indication that they're going all in on him and they need him to make a decision. And I think once they are able to know whether or not he's coming, whether that's a yes or whether that's a no, then they could shift gears and they could change their focus on maybe another quarterback and then building the class around him. But if you go in and you pick up a Dylan Raiola, I would expect the interest from other prospects to rise. I think it'd be a little bit more difficult to go the other way and try to attract talent without having that assurance that that will be the guy throwing you the football.
And what a win that would be for Matt Rule in his first full recruiting cycle to land the #1 quarterback in the class. We'll see what happens there. This next one is from, let's go, Hannah G. Blair, are there any big recruiting weekends out west that you have your eyes on?
There are not any big ones. I think USC, when you think about Oregon, when you think about some of the schools out west, they're saving theirs for later in the spring. But one program that is going to be taking a big swing at things this weekend is Cal, and it's very calculated. It's really smart on their behalf because I think they recognize that no other school is really hosting a lot of big name players, so they're going to try to get in there early and try to get a lot of prospects into Berkeley to get a feel for the program before they go out and see other schools. So the Golden Bears are the school that I'm looking at this weekend. Not the best season on the field, not the best season on the recruiting trail. They took some hits on the PR scale as well when, obviously with UCLA leaving the UC system and leaving the Pac-12 for the Big Ten and kind of leaving their big brother behind per se. So I think they need all the positive vibes that they can get heading into this very crucial year for Justin Wilcox. So Cal is the one that I'm looking at this weekend for in terms of the big recruiting weekends out west.
We don't talk a whole lot about Cal, so clearly their goal is already working in that trying to stand out when other schools are not hosting some of those events. So already well done, Cal. All right. Roman388 asks, what top defensive players have interest in USC?
This is huge for USC. They need all the defensive talent that they could get. They could try to, I guess, patchwork a lot of their holes, right, and a lot of their deficiencies on the offensive side of the ball and on the defensive side of the ball via the transfer portal. But I think the lifeblood of their program being successful is going to have to be in the trenches and also defensive recruiting at the high school level. They need to infuse their roster with talent. Guys like Kobe Black, Xavier Brown on the perimeter at cornerback are highly interested in the Trojans. Those are some really, really good defensive backs that can go in there and step in and make an impact from day one for them. Justin Scott, the 5-star defensive lineman, is one that we keep hearing about USC having a really good shot at as well. And when you think about some of the misses that they had in 2023 in the first true recruiting cycle for Lincoln Riley, I think the big names are Roderick Pleasant, right, who they lost to Oregon on National Signing Day in February, and then losing Mateo Uyangalele in the traditional signing day in December, the early period. Two SoCal players, for them to miss out on two premier prospects from the West Coast, they're going to have to go in and get a big name. And Elijah Rushing would qualify as a big name. He's the number one edge rusher in the class, has visited USC before for an unofficial. I think they're in the mix right now for an official visit. And the Trojans need those types of playmakers. They need the big names on the defensive side of the ball to couple with the offensive weapons that they've built heading into their move to the Big Ten. You know, we make so much about about Texas and Oklahoma headed to the SEC. Well, USC, they're going to take a huge leap up in competition levels, so they need all the star talent they could get, and this is going to be a really crucial class for Lincoln Riley on the defensive side of the ball.
And it just won't be fair, though. If they get the defensive side of the ball figured out, then whew, watch
That's
out,
been the
Big
biggest
Ten.
question, right, with Lincoln Riley, even dating back to Oklahoma. It seemed like that was the big missing piece, the component that was lacking for them to really take that next step whenever they did reach the college football playoff. And we saw what USC did last year with Caleb Williams. They came up short in the Pac-12 championship game. Had they won out, I mean, you think that they're probably in the mix there for one of those 4 spots in the college football playoff. And then you go in and you play maybe a Georgia where, you know, you have that type of offense to match up against Georgia's defense. That would have been really fun and a juicy matchup. So I think that's clearly the point of emphasis for USC this cycle is to really attack the defensive recruiting.
Yeah, got to play some defense when you make that move to the Big Ten. I appreciate all the support in the chat right now. Jason, in all caps, says, like button smashed. Come on, people. We are at 84 likes. We're trying to get to 100. We also got the 24/7 Sports account tweeting to smash that like button. A nice response, though. Adam asking if it's okay to lightly tap the button. He's not necessarily a smash guy. Absolutely. However you want to do it, just hit that like button. We are trying to get to 100 likes by the end of the show. Another question here. I'm going to shock you here with this. It's totally out of left field. If you don't know the answer, that's okay. Tyler C. asking, anything new on Deuce? Deuce Robinson, or still status quo with him?
You know, someone asked me, hey, are you going to talk about Deuce Robinson on today's show? And I said, probably not.
If you
but
ask,
here we
though,
are
we
with
will
a
answer
question.
it.
But here we are with a question on Deuce Robinson. Nothing new, nothing that I've heard that has changed that dateline or that self-imposed deadline for him to make a decision. It's still April 1st. My crystal ball still remains on USC after flipping it from Georgia recently. I think the Trojans are in a really good spot there. And, you know, it's really interesting seeing all these spring training games out in the state of Arizona, the showcases, the high school season kicking off, college baseball's in full swing as well. I'm now kind of checking box scores, making sure, you know, I'm not missing anything on USC baseball or Georgia baseball or, you know, maybe a Deuce Robinson popping up at a college baseball game at some point. I'm kind of tracking all that stuff because it's obviously really important in his recruiting process. And, you know, nothing new to report, but obviously it seems like everything's kind of still pointing towards him making a decision at some point in the next month.
Blair, if he commits on April 1st, though, can we believe it? Just because, you know, it's April Fool's Day. I'm still going to be like, maybe it's, you know, a joke or who knows. But considering all the twists and turns this recruitment has made and how long we've all been waiting for this decision, I can't wait to hear where Deuce Robinson is going to land. Got another question here from Andrew M. If Oregon has another big year and lose offensive coordinator Will Stein after the season, would the constant turnover have a negative impact on their recruiting? It really has been tough for Oregon last couple of years.
I don't think so. I don't think they would skip a beat by any means having to change offensive coordinators. It seems like they have to do it every year. They've even been changing head coaches basically every 2 or 3 years. Oregon has now established itself as a brand nationally. I think every recruit realizes that the uniforms are the thing, right? The facilities, the environment inside Autzen Stadium when, you know, it's a sold out crowd and that program is at a top 10 level like we've seen them play before. But from a recruiting standpoint, I think it's a destination now. I think recruits understand that you're not going there to play for a specific coach, whether that's Dan Lanning or Mario Cristobal or Willie Taggart before that. You know, even Chip Kelly, you know, a decade ago. I think now Oregon has enough brand appeal that it's now an institution, and it's not about going to play for one coach or one assistant or another group of recruits. So, you know, I think if you're Oregon and if you're a fan of Oregon, you actually want Will Stein's name to continue to rise in terms of his stock, right? You want other programs to come in and try to attract him and maybe make him a head coach at some point or offer him a better position somewhere else, because that means you had success on the field. And as long as you're having success on the field, that means you're having success in recruiting, and then it means that the program is on the upward trajectory. So, you know, it's obviously not really fun to have to change coordinators time and time again, but I think Oregon has enough appeal right now that if you're a hot name in coaching, and you're coaching maybe a specific position and you need to take that jump up, or your resume carries a lot of weight right now, I think Oregon's certainly a destination where I think coaches realize it could catapult them into a better position further. So it's kind of a give and take there, where you're Oregon, you're taking a lot of really good assistants, but you're obviously going to give them up once their name kind of gets scorching hot.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse, but hey, Nick Saban's looking for a new offensive coordinator every single year, and they seem to be doing quite all right when it comes to winning championships. 6 likes away from 100. If you haven't hit the like button, please do. Would love to see that number reach triple digits by the end of the show. We've got one question here that I actually am going to answer. Jason asking if you can recall the last time an offensive tackle was the #1 player. Has there ever been one? Our director of research, Ryan McGrady, crunched the numbers for us, and that happened back in 2017 with Walker Little. So I'll ask you, Blair, what do you remember about him as a prospect?
Yeah, he's phenomenal. Obviously, he was, I think, at the time when you recall what Walker Little was, this was a player who looked like he could play right away. And when you think about offensive linemen, it's hard to project. It's hard to think, you know, maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, because you don't know how their body is going to develop. Like you mentioned, Andrew Ivins earlier, and what he said about looking at David Sanders' dad, right? You wonder, okay, that's what maybe he could turn into. Walker Little was that type of player where you saw him, you're like, okay, that he checks off every box that you want for an immediate impact type of player. So I think it's really rare, specifically because when we're projecting out to NFL draft success, it's usually going to be the marquee quarterback, right, or the big time edge rusher that goes #1 overall. But you know, every now and again, the offensive linemen and particularly the offensive tackles really rise on draft boards, and we have to take that into account as well when we're evaluating, when we're projecting, and when we're ranking these players. So I would not be surprised if David Sanders, you know, goes poll to poll, given what we've seen out of him, and given, I think, the projection of his body type and that skill set that he carries with him. And it's certainly looking difficult for someone else to unseat him there at the top of the 2025 rankings.
That would be incredible. Again, these are the 2025, the #1 player in the 2025 class. So lots of changes with the rankings and all of that. We know that our friend Andrew Ivins, director of scouting, will be very busy in terms of ranking these prospects. But as of right now, an offensive tackle could be the #1 overall player. Blair, this was a fun show. Thank you guys for all of your great questions. We are 3 likes away from 100. I will be staring right at my computer screen until we hit 100. Even when I say goodbye, you can still hit that like button. It will still make us very happy. So thank you for joining the show. For Blair Angulo, I'm Emily Proud, and this is the College Football Recruiting Show.